Are you looking for a partner that creates stunning game art and provides seamless co-development? Mineloader Studios has over 20 years of experience creating breathtaking visuals and building worlds for top-tier games. Let's bring your vision to life. Visit mineloader.com.
Welcome to the XDS podcast. This podcast is called ExDev, Seizing Opportunities for Industry Growth and Change. And I'm sitting here with a panel of esteemed colleagues. Starting on my left is, well, you can't see this, but starting on my left is Anna Kozlova, the CEO of Roommate Group. Across the table from me is David Sanderson, formerly of Phoenix Labs, also a XDS Advisory Committee member. And to my right is Sam Carlisle, formerly of Microsoft, currently co-founder of XDS Spark, and also an advisory member for XDS.
Hey. Carl, if people hear some background noise here, what's special about this recording of the podcast in particular?
Well, we are live from the XDS stage this year, so this is a fun little experiment. And how this talk actually came to be was that I actually had an idea to do a presentation on stage, following in the footsteps of Sam's movie model discussion, David's hub model discussion, and then I was going to try to build on that and describe how I did a hub model. And it became complicated because of some internal rules about speaking engagements, so I just didn't think that was a good path to go down. So I changed it and proposed a debate. Now, Sam and David didn't know this was happening. This is all behind the scenes at this point. So I proposed that David moderate a debate between Sam and I to argue about the models and see who comes out winning and maybe win a Gary Award or something. I don't know. But then that devolved because, again, the rules that are put in place kind of prohibited me from proposing that as well. So then I did bring Sam and Dave in, and this is getting long, I'm sorry. But we talked about a debate, and literally Sam said, I agree with everything you're saying, so it's not going to be much of a debate. Yep. Which then evolved into the idea of, let's think forward 5-10 years. What does XDev look like, especially in the current environment? And so we were chatting about that. And then we decided we need another perspective, for sure, from the vendor side, from a woman's point of view as well. And Anna was kind enough. I kind of explained what happened at Weird Gamescom, and was kind enough to volunteer, and I pressed her into service, and here she is. So that's...
I'm excited to be here, and I think it's an interesting topic for us as a service provider, for sure, because we are, I think, lots of service providers right now reconsidering their strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, given the market changes. And it's good to hear your perspective, because we are here for the developers, for the publishers, and we're servicing the industry. We want to understand what is our part in ecosystem and what to do to be as significant part as possible, being completely honest. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, this is a very esteemed group of people. But with that, I am going to toss this to our moderator, who is Dave.
Thanks so much. So thank you, Carl. I think there's one last thing that we skipped over, which was we didn't say who Carl is. So when Carl says that there is an esteemed group, he's absolutely right. So we have here represented somebody who is on the forefront of connecting service providers and developers in the form of Sam Carlisle and XDS Spark. Also, he brings with him a wealth of experience through Microsoft. Carl has been running XDev at Zynga for a very long time and is running one of the largest XDev teams on Earth, certainly at this conference. And what I think still surprises many people is that Anna has built Roommate into one of the most formidable service providers on the planet over the last few years. So what may have been once primarily art has grown into an incredible multi-service line provider. So we certainly have a bunch of perspectives represented here. It's also worth calling out, there's a lot of perspectives that aren't represented here, so it's nice to keep in mind that this discussion doesn't include things like boutique service providers. It doesn't include a lot of folks in developing markets. But with that said, I think we can still certainly have a productive conversation. To set some context, there's a lot of talk here at XDS 2024 about survive to 2025. This notion that over the last, let's say, 18 months, our industry has gone through an incredibly painful time with thousands of layoffs, many closures, very challenging financial time to be in. And out of that problem, there is an opportunity to move forward in some new ways of working, some new ways of thinking, and some new organizational models. And the first thing I'd like to ask, and Grant, maybe Anna, we can start with you, if you could make any one change or see any one thing become true that is not yet true as we go into 2025, what might that be?
That's a tough one. I mean, ideally, I think all of us would love to be in like 2021 again, not COVID-wise, obviously, but in terms of the industry booming and everything related to that. So that would be probably an amazing world once again. But at the same time, if we are talking about realistic things, I don't think we will get there. And I like the idea, let's survive to 2025, but I think I never heard anyone with a very specific explanation why. Like what should be happening in 2025. And I think the realistic goal would be for all of us to adjust much faster to the current reality. Because what's happening in 2023 and 2024, it's probably a drastic shift that will gradually become a bit more stabilized, but to the extent of the conditions that we are in right now, when the industry is not growing that fast on the B2C side. And I honestly don't see the drivers that would like speed up this growth to 15% as it was before, at least for mainstream platforms. There is lots of content being produced, more and more games published each year. That increases competition. That's also probably will not going to change, especially like on the indie side of things. So this is a new market, a new environment we are operating in. The sooner we embrace the change, the better. And those who do that faster probably will achieve market dominance faster.
Before we move on, I'd love to dig into something you said there, which was the idea of wanting to be back in 2021. And I know what you mean is the demand.
Yeah.
But what I hear in that, or I think is something I want to dig into, is
and
like
consumer growth, demand on the consumer side. I mean, not on, because demand on service provider side was a reflection of the demand on the consumer side, and thus was a very good investment environment, more and more title being produced, because like our demand depends on consumer side and on the investment side.
Yes.
Even more on the investment side.
So here's the thing, in 2021, inherently was a situation that produced the bloodbath that we're living in now. So for me, the idea of going back to 2021 means going back to a situation that is unsustainable, is going to blow up, and is dangerous to our ecosystem. And the reason I bring that up is I'd love to hear you say, or hear your thoughts on, when you say embrace change, what does that mean? If you want to embrace what's coming, you want to see more service providers, adapt quickly. For you, or for Room 8, what does adapting quickly mean?
I was talking not only about service provider side, but also our customer side, which is game developers, because if you agree that the market would not be on the consumer side, would not be growing as fast anymore. So you are fighting not for the new demand, right? Either from people spending more or more people playing games. You are fighting for the share of the wallet of the existing players, and this wallet is not growing. So that means you would need to change your business model so you can produce the same quality content at a lower price point, at a lower risk point. For us as a service provider, that might present an opportunity, because we can be a tool, and we are a tool for the developers to actually reduce the risk, reduce the cost, and focus on some things they're very good at on the creative side rather than on production side. So that's what I meant about embracing the change.
That's excellent. Thank you. So I think maybe that's an appropriate time to ask the resident developer in this conversation, when you hear about what Anna's saying, how does that resonate with your experience?
Yeah, I do agree with Anna on these points. I think what I'd like to say is I think that external development is going to be more and more important as we go on for these next 5 years, 10 years. I think that is going to grow as an industry. I think from a Zynga standpoint, we are back in kind of coming out of this 2021 bubble that we were in, and we were producing games, but not at the rate we're about to be doing it. So I see that this is recovering. We are recovering. I think there's going to be a whole lot of growth. I think the opportunity is in the state that we're in, where people have lost a lot of jobs. I think we're seeing the opportunity to create more growth for external development. I see some of these people that are in between things, starting their own companies, and there's going to be growth there. I think the demand is going to be there. I think it is going to recover. It might not be recovering for every company as fast, but I think, from my perspective, I see light at the end of this tunnel, and I see growth at the end of this tunnel. So,
Sam, you occupy a really unique space, talking to both developers and service providers, bridging that conversation. Does that align with your thinking, or how would you put any nuance on that?
It's actually quite optimistic. And I love to hear it. I'm all about getting hold of optimistic and good news where we can find it. The view is, I think there's going to be growth, but it's going to be returning growth. So it's going to be growth trying to get back to maybe not where we were 21, but somewhere just before that. The actual income, the money being earned, that's still going up. Right? We're still seeing profit coming in, but the way that's spread and shared and the way that's distributed is uneven. So it's proving much harder to occupy that lower and middle spaces as there used to be before. There's been a chunk taken away. I'd like to see, we want to see a little bit of movement in the money markets first. That's going to be our first indicators, and we are seeing a little bit of that happening. But most of XDev lives in full production, and that's further down the line. And that's where the challenge is. We've still got a ways to go. Even if it was to suddenly turn around tomorrow, there's a way to go before we really start to see the benefits come through. I think what's most interesting that's happening at the moment is the sheer inconsistency in experience. Service providers are telling me different stories and having different reactions to the market right now. They're all going through it in a different way. And I think that speaks to the uncertainty inside the development community about how they actually come out the other side of this and what shape they look like when they come out the other side of this. So that uncertainty, when you talk about opportunity, that's where it resides. It's those that can ride through that uncertainty.
So one of the things that I'm really passionate about, and I know a lot of the people here are as well, is that how we make video games, how external development operates, how we leverage our partners could be significantly better than our sort of standard mode of operating is. And for example, I'm sure Roommate has experienced many different developers making the same kinds of mistakes. So Roommate is forced to adapt with each new contract. Like, we figured it out for Zynga, and we don't then figure it out for Microsoft. And building on that, you actually have to learn the same lessons over and over again. Mm-hmm. If that's a fair characterization. And so my thought is, I'm less interested in building back to something or business as usual as I am interested in seizing this opportunity to do some things differently. So what do you think we should do differently if we have this moment in time where the old thing is over, the new thing is beginning? What do you want to be true about the future of external development? Anna.
I think the ideal future for us is probably getting trust of the developers and having more and more independency in the sense of delivering full scopes, because In that way, we are reducing overhead for the developers. You don't need to manage, 5 providers for characters only, right? You can do characters with one provider, or you can do the whole DLC with one provider. And if we get this trust, if we build the process where we have good communication flow from both sides, we agree on what we are doing, on the milestones and checks on everything, and you know that you got this thing as a developer, that you got this thing covered, I think that's an ideal combination for both parties. For the teams as well, on the both sides.
What, in your opinion, is preventing that from becoming true? If that's the ideal state, what are the risks or what are the problems that are stop us from getting to that ideal state?
I think right now it very much depends on the studio. You're totally right. Some studios are already doing in this way or starting to do in this way. So, for example, one of the studios, the newly built studio, they raise investments. It would be premium with free-to-play part. So they're saying we're growing our team exactly till the size that would be needed for live ops. We are not growing any further. We will cover that with a service provider, with external development, because we want to have our stable team. Small team is the way we like to work. And also, there will be low risk for the team. Team will know that they're there for long. They will not be laid off. And for the service provider, of course, it creates this cooperation model where more things would be fully transferred to the service provider responsibility. So nothing kind of preventing us to do that, but there is studios who prefer to have everything in-house, prefer to have full control over the production process, and that right now might create certain issues. Again, so you have 3 providers for characters. If you have delay with one of them, now it's on you to manage the other 2 who are waiting for that part to be finished, right? So you have this delay across the whole line, and you are the one as a developer managing that. So that's the old model where you want to have a full control over production. And I think that's a pivotal point would be developing trust. More and more studios going this modern way, showing, and that also depends on the service provider to provide a good work, right? Showing that this model works, that you can have high quality content, you can have full transparency. So you understand that the risk is actually limited, and if you have a good partner, it would not be higher than having that thing internally, right? So I think this trust building is the only way that's preventing us now from that.
So Carl, maybe you could take this. If we see dev teams moving away from we're trying to own more things proportionally internally to a new environment where we are using external development, we are using service providers more extensively, what does a normal dev team or a standard dev team look like in the future from your perspective compared to the past?
So internally, we have many studios. Some are run in the way that Anna has just outlined. Some are run where they're all internal, but they're coming to the realization that financially, internally, that's not such a good model, and the ups and downs with that. So literally last week, a new studio under our wing was talking about, we need to do engineering out of house. And it makes sense because we don't want to keep on ramping them up, ramping them down. We do, another studio, for instance, we didn't have the knowledge internally that our external partners had. So we are learning on the job, and literally chunks of this game were all done in a house. We let those companies have ownership because they're the experts. We weren't the experts. And that collaboration has actually done really well for us. Now, whether this studio trusts or this studio doesn't trust, that's the thing that we have to work through. And to Anna's point, and we do have long-term relationships, so we have different factors of trust. We trust these guys a lot. These guys are new. We're not sure if we trust them. So engagements can start slow, but building on that trust, I think we are trending more towards trusting our partners more to take on big chunks of games and actually help us develop them. Make those suggestions. Your interface sucks. Have you considered this? And I actually just yesterday here met with a very interesting company, and I said, well, do you do UI UX analysis? Because I would love to know what you think about this game that we just released and what you would do differently, because that actually gives us retention, more players, if the controls are better, if the UI UX is better. And let's apply what you give us in that analysis to the next game that's very similar and tweak that secret sauce. So I'm depending on my service providers heavily to help us develop the game, not just the concept or whatever, but really develop the game. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I mean, I think to sort of build on what you're saying there, maybe Sam, this could be something that you would answer. Have any conversations you've had at XDS 2024 affected the way that you're thinking about 2025?
Some of it's maybe a little bit more pessimistic, if I'm being honest. I don't want to say that.
So we are debating, are we?
Yeah, it's a little bit more pessimistic, just in the amount of time it's going to take to get there. I think what we're talking about when we're looking at what the studios need and what the developers need, I think a big chunk of that is we need a mindset shift into this is how we make games. We have been making games like this for a long time, but it's been a forcing function. It's been something that we've needed to do rather than something we want to do. And I'd like to see that shift. And I don't think until that shift really occurs, we're going to see the growth that we need to see, that we'll see. Because we all know that, I think, external development is what comes out on top of this. This is the model that will happen at the end of this period.
Just to be clear, so what you're saying is that we need people to want to change to a more modern external development, not feel like they're being dragged kicking and screaming into it.
Yes, exactly. We have a history of using... The history of external development is one of necessity, right? So it's always been born out of we need to lower costs, or we don't have the bandwidth, or we don't have the skill set. It's always been necessity that's driven it. And when you do that, it's a different mindset. It's like, I have to do this. And when you change it to, I want to do this, I want to build a studio that has a lot of partners that I'm excited to work with, that has a lot of people who are great at what they do, that can really bring, and just as you mentioned, Carl, can bring something extra, something outsized. I want to leverage that into how we make games. When the mindset shifts to that, then I think we'll see the kind of future that we're wanting to see in games, and we'll see that come out of it. But what we are seeing at the moment is, because a lot of the layoffs have been quite arbitrary, they've not been strategic, we're not rebuilding our studios yet to do that, to have that mindset. We are coping with what's been left behind and using ExDev to fill in some gaps. There are emergency gaps. So that's why we're seeing people returning to their trusted suppliers, because it's low risk. If they're not going out to new suppliers, they're not bringing in as much, they're not taking as many chances on new suppliers. And so what I'd really like to see is when the studio heads, when people come out going, this is how we're going to do it, and we want to be excited about doing it this way, because it's going to provide security, it's going to provide flex, it's going to provide new perspectives that we haven't had before, and they're going to bring in skill sets that we haven't properly leveraged before, but we can do now. When we see that shift, then there's going to be real enthusiasm around the space, and then I think we'll start to see something fantastic.
Anna, does that line up with your experience?
Yeah, I think to a very good extent it does, for sure. Right now, it always will be a necessity, though. I mean, there's, in a way, that there's always should be a business reason behind it. It's good if no one opposing that, because I just don't want to work with a service provider or external dev, because my preferred way is to have my own team as big as possible with full control, because only then I'm confident we can deliver the game I am envisioning, or our team is envisioning. So if we don't have this obstacle, and then again coming back to trust, we are there, but there always should be a business reason behind. And I think right now, with this market changes, business reason becomes more and more obvious.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carl.
Just add to that. So I think I have a little bit of a luxury with what I've been able to build out. And my group, I mean, we're pretty strong, we're a worldwide group. We are advocating for this type of model. Actually, we go to those studios and say, well, have you thought about this? And you can trust these people, and you can trust this group to do really good work. And we have to instill that confidence to make that model happen within my org. And I don't know how other orgs are set up to do that. I mean, I know a lot of them are understaffed. Just talking to a lot of people in this same similar role, but I have a whole bunch of people to help advocate for these changes in that future within my company, and to some extent now within my parent company and the sister companies that we have. So we're all talking, we're all trying to advocate for these changes that we know have to happen or are going to happen organically at some point. But that's just my perspective on it.
And one of the things that I've noticed, and this is anecdotal, but with so much closures, both on the service provider side and on the dev side, is we've wound up with a polarizing effect. So there's fewer middle-sized companies. The big companies are sort of doubling down on the huge franchises. So Assassin's Creed is still going to come out, and Call of Duty is still going to come out. And so the top end is very heavy. And then there's one of the things that follows from widespread layoffs is some subset of those people will decide that's the time they're going to start their own thing. Maybe it's start their own game studio, maybe start their own outsource studio, but we're seeing, or I feel like I'm seeing, many, many, many small shops opening up, and the big kids, getting stronger and bigger, and a hollowing out of the middle. So my question is, one, Sam, does that line up with your experience? And two, do you think that will change or not change what the future of game dev looks like?
Yeah, we are seeing a lot more. We saw a lot more pop up through COVID during that time as well. They sprung up to answer the call of the sheer amount of work that was going around. And that's continued here with the layoffs. Every developer has a game that they want to make, so they're going to, where the layoffs and a bit of redundancy money in the back pocket, that's going to springboard some of that as soon as we can get the money markets moving again. It'll be interesting to see whether or not these new companies that come in, the movement we see in the AA and the III space, if they start to occupy that middle ground, if they start to take advantage of the new studios that are springing up. Because quite often these new studios are sprung up by people who are well known. We're a very large, small industry, right? And so you will find that some of these new studios will reach out and go, oh, so-and-so I used to work at my old company has now started an art studio. Great, I loved working with him. I'm going to work with those guys because they're working on a much smaller one-to-one basis. And I think that's enough tinder and spark to be able to start to rebuild that sector. We'll see a bit more specialism coming out of there as well. The question is going to be, how do you make them all work? I think one of the problems that we're really going to face is the internal bandwidth to handle external development. And I don't know if we've seen enough acknowledgement, especially with the new studios, that they build that in as they're building the studio, that this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have the internal resources to not throttle external dev.
This just sprung to mind with all these new studios that are popping up and consolidation continuing. Where do we see that going? Because these little it's funny because they're here 1 year and then the next year they're acquired already. Mm-hmm. Do we keep seeing that trend happening? I mean, Anna,
everyone's looking at Anna.
It's not like we're acquiring back and forth, but I think that will happen because with any mature industry, that's what's happening. Mm-hmm. And if you look, at the mobile part of the market, that's what's already happening for a couple of years. I think that we will just keep seeing that with bigger consolidation, but because it's a hit-driven business, when an indie studio can create a game that becomes a hit, it will continue happening. And following your discussions that you guys had, it's very similar to the movie industry. You still can have an unexpected hit with a low budget, right? And there will be also always the niche part of the market where people really love certain genre, and in the game built in the genre, if that's a good game, they will always give they will have their followship, but within this quite small niche, and maybe it's not super interesting for the bigger player to acquire. But overall, as soon as you have a hit in the mainstream genre, of course you will get attention from top 5 market leaders with an acquisition proposal, and most probably that will happen.
Has your opinion on growth through acquisition versus growth through hiring and sort of organic growth changed over the last few years, for Roommate specifically?
I think yes and no. When we started discussing acquisitions internally, we reached certain size and we were okay, maybe we are big enough for having this discussion at least. We were thinking about, okay, this synergy, that synergy, other things, and we are still looking through that prism. But also, in some cases, acquisition or merger will help both companies to buy time. That's because if you're growing something organically, no matter how big you are, how experienced you are, it takes time, whether it's a new business line or whether it's a new region, it always takes time. So when you have a good partner for merger or acquisition, that saves time for them to grow and for you to grow.
Yeah.
I think for our clients, it's a bit different story. It's not only time, it's also like shifting the risk. You don't take a creative risk developing game, you just acquire something that's already proven itself as it's happening in mobile area. So probably for us and for the game developers, the reasoning might be very different. For us, it's more like you are buying time rather than reducing the risk.
Do you think, just out of interest, do you think with the studio closures we've seen coming from the developers, from the large publishing houses, that if you are a mid-sized developer that's created a hit or doing well, that there will be a reluctance now to be acquired because it's not the safe route that it used to be. You can be acquired.
This is the question I was going to ask too. Yeah.
You can now be shut down. So if I'd created a game that was a decent hit and that there was a large studio coming after me to be acquired to join their portfolio, I would now be thinking, well, is this just a pathway to the end of my studio?
Yeah, I mean, let's be direct here. The existence of Embracer Group looms very large in our industry, right? Like it's certainly not the only party that is relevant here, but that looms very large. Or you could, Savvy Games is another one. So, and then I think about sort of some of the groups getting involved in the service provider side, like the acquisition of Keywords is a huge deal. So, for a lot of folks who are not at the senior leadership level, the idea of an acquisition is inherently frightening, right? It is associated with risk and loss and disruption, not associated with success and growth. Do you think there's any validity to that? And where do you see the acquisition process going in our industry?
So I think acquisition is always it's complex, it's frightening, there is always differences in culture, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it frightens people right now because it's a bad economic cycle, and that's why there is a combination. Someone got acquired a year ago, and now there are layoffs, and you kind of always because we got acquired. But it's not exactly the case. It's because of the economic cycle, and maybe without acquisition, probably there would be the same result if the financials would not be there. If you develop a hit, you want to develop the next one. If you don't have enough cash flow out of your hit, and you are looking for investment, that would be a hard time. In any case, so maybe you would need to do layoffs in any case. It's not, but people associate that with acquisitions that happen.
I'd like to link that back to what you said about niche as well. I think one of the things that we are good at as an industry is that we can make money from niche, right? And I think when I think about layoffs, the target that you have as a studio to reach in terms of growth and in terms of monetization when you have been acquired is much harder than the target is to keep your studio alive when you've not been acquired. So your financial goals are lower, so you may not need to do the layoffs because you're just not having to earn that level of money. You're having to earn enough money to be able to keep the lights open and your next project rolling. And you're right about the second project. I mean, that's traditionally where studios close because they get overambitious.
We're just getting into the good stuff here, and we are getting the signal that we need to wrap this up. So I think two of the things that come here from this are, obviously there's a much more discussion to be had here. So, might need to get the bandit back together at another time. But to finish up, maybe from each of you, what is one thing that you hope to see in 2025? Just, in general, in your profession, what do you hope to see?
I hope to see enthusiasm. I hope to see it from a C level. I want to see enthusiasm. Yeah, I do. I want to see from a C level going, this is great. This is how we're going to do it. The external people we work with are fantastic. And I'd like to see our industry celebrated rather than trying to poke itself out from the shadows and not bring too much attention to itself.
Carl, what do you hope to see?
Well, I completely agree with Sam on that, and I would like to see the recognition, and Sam and I have talked about this offline, but I feel like we are still like that little bastard child. I don't know if I can say that on a podcast, but I feel like we're still treated like that, and I don't necessarily like it, because I know that we all contribute to every game. I mean, you don't make games generally without some sort of external help, and I don't think that the industry puts enough emphasis on that. I mean, that is why we do these talks and we travel to GDC and do roundtables to try to further that world. And I would encourage CEOs and C-staff to come to these things and learn what we do. Don't just look at the bottom line financially. Look at what we are contributing and put some value on it. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'd love to.
That sounds amazing. It's very hard to add something on top. But I think having harmony would be ideal, right? Like having stability and stable growth, because we still need to produce content for like that's how the model works. But without like drastic, like uncontrolled growth or layoffs and uncontrolled shrinking, like having stability and harmony between internal dev and ExDev seen in the same way from both sides, like that would be an amazing future of 2025.
I think that's a great place to wrap it up. And so with that, I just wanted to say thank you for listening and thank you for tuning in to this live recording edition of the XDS podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.